Welcome to the very first episode of the Pan Am podcast, brought to you by the Pan Am Museum in Garden City, New York. This podcast and our museum are dedicated to celebrating the legacy of the world's most iconic airline, Pan American World Airways. If you're not familiar with Pan Am, welcome. We are honored to have you here and for you to learn about what we're all about. If you already know of Pan Am, worked for or flown on the airline, or just love our history, it's good to be with you again. So with that, let's get this episode in the air, so to speak. Welcome aboard your Pan American Jet Clipper. Welcome back. All the music we use on this and future podcasts are from the Pan Am commercials. In fact, the disco intro theme you just heard is the famous You Can't Beat the Experience theme, composed by Steve Carman, who was known in the advertising industry as the King of the Jingle. Pan Am was always recognized with quality excellence and its obsession with providing the best customer experience possible. From fine French foods to plush, comfortable seats, Pan Am brought class and luxury to air travel and set the industry standard for decades. The company focused on every detail of the brand. Here's a great example. Another version of that song you heard a bit ago became the signature theme for the company and was used as the boarding and deplaning music on all Pan Am wide-body aircraft throughout the 1980s, up until closing in December of 1991. We'll explore Pan Am music and advertising campaigns on a future episode. The Pan Am Museum Foundation is a nonprofit organization. Our mission statement is to educate, celebrate, and inspire present and future generations by preserving historical and diverse personal stories of Pan American World Airways. Please visit our website for more information at thepanammuseum.org. Again, our website is thepanammuseum.org. You can also find us on Facebook and Instagram. We would love to meet you when you visit our museum on Long Island, which is just a short distance away from New York City. Every episode of the Pan Am podcast will be divided into two parts. In the first part, we will explore Pan Am's fascinating and unique history. We're excited to share some fun and very interesting stories with you. The second part will feature an insightful interview. Sometimes our guest will be a Pan Am employee, family member, or Pan Am passenger, all sharing their unique stories. We will divide the podcast with an audio cue. When you hear this sound, it means that the second part of the podcast will begin. For this first episode, we thought it best to introduce you to our museum, who we are, what we're doing, and what we're all about. So we're happy to be joined by the museum's board chair, co-founder, and museum director, Linda Freire. Welcome to the Pan Am podcast, Linda.
Thank you, Tom. So happy to be here, and thank you for hosting the Pan Am podcast, what we believe might be the first podcast with the subject of Pan Am ever known. So we're real happy to be starting, hopefully, what will be a series of podcasts related to the iconic airline that I love.
The museum opened to the public in 2016 on Long Island. Tell us a little bit about how it got started.
Sure. Well, a group of us back in 2015 were asked to get a picture of a plaque that resides on the harbor in Port Washington, Long Island, New York. We were contacted by one of our colleagues who resides in Paris, a gentleman by the name of Bruce Gately, and Bruce was a Pan Am flight attendant as well. He was contacted by the French government asking him to get a copy of this plaque so they could commemorate the 75th anniversary of the first transatlantic crossing of a commercial airliner. And of course, that was Pan Am. So a group of us went down to Port Washington on the harbor, and we are looking at this plaque, which kind of was a little bit of an emotional moment for us, knowing that our airline did not exist anymore, but that there was such historic significance. This was the summer of 2015. I'm going to say probably July 2015. And just organically and kind of out of nowhere, we said, why isn't there a Pan Am Museum? The group of us, it was Andrea Sider, Kathy Fong, and Julie Watson, who was then the president of the World Wings International. And we just kind of looked at each other and we took a moment and said, there should be a museum. And the takeaway from that gathering was, we need to do something about this. There has to be a museum. We set about the task of researching what we needed to do. We knew we wanted to have a non-for-profit registered 501c3. Andrea Sider took the lead on that, did her research, given her experience and background skill set as a paralegal. We met with a renowned CPA expert on 501c3 filings, a gentleman by the name of Garrett Higgins. And he really gave us an overview on what we needed to do. Andrea really set about the task of researching the paperwork, starting the paperwork. We did some of the effort of completing it together. And then she filed it. And we waited to see if we were accepted. And lo and behold, a few months later, we were accepted as a registered 501c3. And of course, they backdated it to August, to the date of the filing. And the Pan Am Museum Foundation was born.
It's pretty remarkable. So December 4th of this year will be the 30th anniversary of the closing of the airline. And many of your former colleagues, lost their pensions when the airline went bankrupt and ceased operations. However, there's this camaraderie that is incredible. Can you speak to that?
Well, it kind of defies explanation, because I don't know that there's any other company that has been out of business for 30 years that still has a fan base, if you will, and a very extremely dedicated, loyal following of its employees. Pan Am is unique in that way, but Pan Am was unique in so many ways. It was a family from the beginning. You really joined this company that had been in existence for decades, when I joined them, and it was a feeling that you were a part of something special. And I don't know if it was instinctive in the hiring, but Pan Am hired people who just wanted to be there to put the airline, put the company, what they were doing, their business, whether it be maintenance, whether it be ramp services, whether it be passenger services, in-flight services, or flying the plane, no matter what your role, driving the crew bus to bring the employees to the airport, whatever it was, you wanted to ensure that you did the best that you could. And it was like in the DNA of everybody. And I think reading a book lately that was written by Charlie Ambriani, which is called Missions of Mercy and Evacuation Flights, you get a sense of what Pan Am was from the beginning, from 1927, from its origins. There was a company that was comprised of individuals who were going to make a difference, whether it was in the lives of a traveler or within the lives of a person who needed help and assistance. Pan Am was there. And I think that was the bond that held us together, and that's what made it so special.
We'll get to your story in a moment, but let's go back to the museum.
Sure.
So tell us about where the museum stands today and your vision of what will it be about in the future.
Well, it's hard to believe that in 2015, we had just gotten our 501c3 status. And in 2016, we rented space in an existing aviation museum on Long Island called the Cradle of Aviation Museum. And we've been there now 5 years and very happy to be there. We have built several exhibits, all dedicated and centered around a theme of an airplane and an era. And Pan Am was very loyal to Boeing manufacturing for many years. And until probably the 80s, they relied pretty much exclusively on Boeing aircraft and McDonnell Douglas as well. I mean, there were other aircraft in the airline's fleet, including Lockheed and including the Constellation and some other very famous aircraft that were known in aviation history. But they had an extreme loyalty, and I think that was because a special bond that existed between Juan Trippe and Bill Allen of Boeing, of the Boeing Corporation. That bond was a friendship, and so deals were made with a handshake. There wasn't a bunch of lawyers involved at the time. It was a handshake and a request to build a certain type of aircraft according to the specifications that Juan Trippe envisioned. So here we are now, 6 years, 5 years back, past the date where we file for our 501c3, and we have exhibits that tell the story of the early days of Pan Am on the B314 and the China Clipper aircrafts, where Pan Am not only started flying commercial aviation routes, developing those routes along with a gentleman that many people know, Charles Lindbergh. I'm not sure if a lot of people know that Charles Lindbergh actually worked for Pan Am, was a consultant for many years, and charted the routes, the international routes that are still used today for commercial aviation. They built this airline then, and with Juan Trippe's vision, they crossed the Atlantic, they crossed the Pacific, and started something that was very special. We tell that story in the B314 exhibit. We then move on to the next era, which was the luxury liner of aircraft, which is depicted in our exhibits as the Stratocruiser or the B377 aircraft. That was a double-decker aircraft. It was really an age of lifting or raising the bar on the level of service provided on board.
And what time frame are we talking? 1950s?
Yeah, the Stratocruiser was entered into service about 1949, just after, shortly, a few years after World War II, because the aircraft was a derivative of a military aircraft that was used during the war. But now, after the war, and many thanks to Pan Am, there were airports. So you didn't have to use the flying boats to land on bodies of water. So now, during the war, and with the assistance of Pan Am, a lot of the airports were built during the war and available now so that land-based aircraft could fly into cities like Paris and Rome and London proper, as opposed to going into a seaport that would be close to them or close to those cities. So from 1949 to probably 1958 was the age of the luxury liner or the Stratocruiser. It was also the time when there was an introduction of Maxims as the caterer on board the aircraft. And it sounds a little funny to say caterer, but Maxims developed the menus.
And that's the famous restaurant in Paris?
That is the famous restaurant in Paris. And on some of the early flights, that were designated presidential flights, destinations like London and Paris, there was this elevated presidential service on board, and the China was specially imprinted with a presidential seal. And the menu was indicative and reflective of a five-star restaurant, either in New York or Paris. And on some of these early flights, a chef from Maxims would be on board assisting in the preparation and delivery and presentation, I guess I should say, of the meals. So it was
That's incredible.
It was a special event. It was a special time. Flying was about elegance and sophistication, and it had a whole different appeal or a whole different feeling, I guess, than flying today.
So what would you like to tell people that may have never had an opportunity to fly on Pan Am? For instance, people under 30 would never have had an opportunity to fly on Pan Am because the airline ceased operations in 1991.
Well, of course, my first thing is come to see the museum, come visit the exhibits. Right after the Stratocruiser we built the 707 exhibit. Now, this is a time of amazing excitement, and I think a person who comes to visit the museum will get a sense of the fun and the growth of Pan Am and its pivotal position, not only in commercial aviation, but in the world and how it affected world history. You'll learn a lot. You'll get a taste, I guess I should say, in the exhibits that we've built, from the B314 to the Stratocruiser to the 707 to the Jumbo Jet Air and the 747. You'll get a good understanding of just how essential Pan Am was to the evolution of commercial aviation in this country, but also indelibly woven into the very fabric and history of the United States in the 20th century.
So let's talk a little bit about your personal history. So when did you become a part of Pan Am?
Well, hired in 1979, but I actually started my training in 1980. At the time, Pan Am was going through, when I was hired, there was a pending acquisition of what was National Airlines. The merger occurred in 1980. So my training class occurred in April. Official hire date was April 2nd of 1980. There's a 1-month training and 6 months of probation where you have your silver wings. And then if you successfully complete your probationary period, then you are given your gold wings. And that is a very exciting opportunity when you get your gold wings pinned on you. And you know that you made it. You're part of the official Pan Am flight attendant capacity right now. And it was special. I remember getting my gold wings and being very thrilled. And I think later on in my career, I also went into management, and I was actually assistant base director for Pan Am in New York. And it gave me just as much a thrill when I was in a position to pin gold wings on the new hire flight attendants who had successfully completed their probationary period. So it's kind of it's kind of a feeling of acceptance, and you made the grade, and it was pretty significant to make the grade as a Pan Am flight attendant. So that was very special.
Take us through an average flight for you as a flight attendant.
Well, as a new hire flight attendant, as a junior flight attendant, you're kind of, everything is done by seniority. So you really have to bid for trips. And you also did standby. I think it was quarterly. It was every 3 months you were on standby, which means you had 90 minutes for wherever you live to get to the airport once they called you, which living in Manhattan could be an interesting experience of getting to the airport in 90 minutes, given the traffic. But we did it. Yeah, we had fun. We did it. And I have some interesting tales of some of those events. But so you report to your flight if you have a flight that is not from standby, if you had what was called a flight that was on your line, if you were able to hold a line flying a trip. You report 90 minutes before your scheduled departure, and you had a briefing. And the briefing was with the rest of the crew. The captain would usually come in, say hi to everybody, kind of give them any other kind of little details that might be pertinent. In-flight supervisor, the operations control supervisor would come in, give maybe a little bit of a details if there's anything significant on the flight, as far as maybe passengers or celebrities, dignitaries, any special information. In fact, there was what was called a SIL, S-I-L, special information log, that the purser or the person who was in charge of the flight attendants on board the aircraft would review with the crew so that we had awareness of anything that we should be particularly attentive to on the flight. After the briefing, you would probably go to the aircraft about an hour prior to departure. You'd board the aircraft, check your equipment, stow your luggage, and then get the cabin ready for boarding. And boarding is, I think everybody's pretty familiar with the boarding process on an aircraft. And then after takeoff, making sure that you get everybody's drinks and things ready. We had bar carts in those days. So it was a lot easier than in the days when they had to run out drinks on a tray on a large 747. So we would set up the bar carts and then get the bar carts ready to go out and offer people something to drink. Of course, the procedure you followed would vary depending on what class of service, what cabin you worked in. If you were in first class, there's no bar cart. This is all personal hand-delivered service. You're taking orders. You're walking around to each seat and you're requesting from that person, whoever that person is, you're asking, you have their name in front of you. And so you make sure that you address that person by name and you ask them what they would like to drink. And of course, you've already handed out the menus in first class that has an offering of the champagnes and the wines and the meals that would be available on that particular flight going to that particular destination. While in the back, as I said, you're doing the bar cart. And then once you've finished offering drinks in the back, then you're getting ready for the meal service. And when I first started flying, there were no meal carts. We did hand carry trays out to passengers. So
was that difficult? Like on a big 747?
Well,
you're in the main cabin?
It could be interesting. You learn how to carry and balance things. It was difficult if there was turbulence. It could be an interesting experience. But and I had a couple of interesting experiences
Oh,
with
please tell us.
Oh, please. One one was it was actually after the meal service, and I was pouring coffee. And in those days, in the back, we would bring out a silver pot with coffee in it, hot coffee. And I had a tray that had sugar and real milk, not a creamer package. We had real milk in a creamer cup. So, and I would go around, or whoever was working the coffee service coffee and tea, would walk around the cabin after the trays were in the process of being picked up in the back, and offer coffee or tea to anyone who requested it. So all of a sudden, out of the blue, we hit clear air turbulence, and the plane dropped probably about, I don't know, I'm guessing 10,000 feet, enough so that the floor of the aircraft dropped out from underneath me. And
Oh my gosh.
I'm kind of suspended. My knees are bent now, and I'm kind of trying to absorb the shock, because I know at some point the plane's coming back up and I'm going to meet the floor again of the plane. And it happened very quickly. But as I'm going through this, and in my mind it's surreal and it's almost in slow motion, I'm noticing that the coffee, the liquid, is coming out of the coffee pot in a perfect cylinder. It was almost like gravity controlled it. And it rose up out of the coffee pot in a perfect cylinder and fell back into the pot in a perfect cylinder. And not a drop was spilled.
Wow. Wow.
And I was marveled, because I remember thinking in my head, oh, I'm going to get burned. This is not going to be good. Not a single drop spilled. The plane leveled off. I had my feet back with me again on the floor on solid footing. And everyone just kind of looked. I looked, because we all thought this was going to be not a good thing. And all of a sudden people started clapping. And I kept thinking, I did nothing. I did absolutely nothing. I could never do that again. But I would just take it about. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
It's all part of the in-flight entertainment.
It's all part of the in-flight experience. But it was remarkable. And to this day, I still don't know. I kept saying, I need to talk to somebody who knows, I don't know if it's astrophysics, I don't know what it is, but how that happened, that the coffee just came in this perfect round cylinder and fell right back into the pot in the same format in which it had exited the pot. It was amazing. It was absolutely amazing. Yeah.
So the first class service was a little bit more elaborate, right?
Yeah, it was designed to resemble a fine dining experience in a 5-star restaurant. There was a roast beef that was cooked to order on the plane and carved at tableside. So anyone ordering the roast beef, no matter how they wanted it cooked, from rare, extremely rare, to well done, which we tended to frown on a little bit, we would prepare and provide. And the first class service would start out with what was very reflective of Pan Am, but a caviar service. And Pan Am was kind of known for this incredible caviar presentation with the toast points and the sour cream and the bellinis. It was a beautiful service. And then, you'd have a salad cart, and then you'd have the roast beef cart. And for those people who did not wish to have the roast beef, there were other entrees, maybe lobster thermidor or chicken velouté, or some other item that might be reflective of the destination city. So it was always a beautiful service in first class, and the food was very good. It was really very well done. And it was memorable. I think people still today who flew Pan Am first class remember it. And, there was a whole experience out in the West Coast, the Pan Am experience, that recreated this whole environment on board Pan Am first class. And it was very popular. Unfortunately, the pandemic has closed it for the time being. But it really gave people the opportunity to see how truly special that service presentation was, and the whole experience. It was an experience. It wasn't just a flight. It was an experience.
So how does that make you feel, that there's a museum about your beloved airline? There's a Pan Am experience in LA where people can pay to re-experience what it was like in the 1970s first class. How does that make you feel?
Oh, there's a sense of pride. There's a sense of joy and nostalgia and a desire to, that we always wish, if only. So it's bittersweet in a way. Um, I don't know that type and level of service would be um, able to survive in today's commercial aviation environment. But it's still, it's a mixed bag. You do have a sense of pride, and it was something special. It was a moment in time, and I'm just grateful that I had the opportunity to live it.
So you were a flight attendant, and then you went over to management. How was that transition?
It was interesting because my first position within a manager capacity was kind of as a special assignment, and I went into what was called departure controls. And so I'm still interacting routinely, daily with the flight attendant group. And a lot of flight attendants, those who did choose to maybe go into an office environment after a while of flying, followed the same route. You came in through the departure controls, and that again is the area where the flight attendants report for their flight. And so you're interacting with them as they come in to leave on the trips, and you're interacting as they come in from their trips. So you kind of stayed in the same group. But what I'm so grateful for is the opportunities that Pan Am gave me on special assignment as a new operational control supervisor. And that was, and I always said that Pan Am was my flying carpet around the world because I was invited and asked to go on special assignment to many different cities. And I did special assignments in Hong Kong, in Singapore, in Bangkok, in Kenya, and I'll never forget that. My having those opportunities to live for several months in those locales really gave me a better understanding of people around the world and different cultures. And I'm very appreciative, obviously, of my own home and my own culture, but more appreciative of the fact of what Pan Am meant around the world. So that was a wonderful experience. I was probably on the road for almost 2 years with special assignments. And then when I came back, I was asked to go into the in-flight service office and into more of a kind of training role and supervisor role within what was considered an HR department within the flight service group. And I enjoyed that.
You mentioned earlier in the program celebrities and dignitaries. Any stories you'd like to share?
Well, I guess one of my favorites, and we did have all kinds of different celebrities. And Peter Jennings was an ABC news anchor at the time, and he used to fly the shuttle a lot. And my father was a news anchor or news person as well. And so I don't know, I had this fascination with Peter Jennings. And so one time when I was working the shuttle and he was on the shuttle, and I was like, oh my God, I was just so happy to meet him. And it was thrilling. It was just like, cross that off the bucket list. And he couldn't have been nicer. He was just a lovely man. From every perspective. And, but one of my favorite stories is Rod Stewart. And I was living in Manhattan at the time, and I was getting ready to leave on one of my trips. And I had gone downstairs, and on the corner, as I was walking down to get the Cary bus, which was the bus that took us that would take you to the airport. So as on the corner, I see this very long stretch limo parked. And there's a pair of sunglasses on the top of the roof of the limo. And I was like, okay, this person is going to drive off and they're going to lose their sunglasses. So I grabbed the sunglasses, and the windows were very tinted. So I tap on the window rolls down, and there's Rod Stewart.
Wow.
And I kind of said, oh, hi, you left these on the roof. And he was like, well, thank you very much, and rolled down the window, and off he went. And off I go to the airport to work my New York to London flight. And I'm standing at the boarding door, and guess who's boarding the flight?
Wow, Rod Stewart.
Rod Stewart. And he just looked at me because I think there was this moment, like, I'm sure he didn't remember, but maybe it triggered something. And I just looked at him and I said, "You could have at least offered me a ride." And so we just had a little giggle, and then, kind of a nice little banter during the flight. But it was funny. It was a funny, remarkable experience. And it just always sat with me that you just never know where you're going to run into people or meet them. And he too was very nice. He was very, very nice. Enjoyed just talking to him on the flight.
What memories really stand out to you, both positive and not so positive, in your career at Pan Am?
Oh, and there were so many. As I said, getting my gold wings pinned on me was pretty pivotal. Successfully completing probation. Going on these special assignments were very special. I worked with other flight attendants who were on special assignment also, and we just had enormous fun. It was hard work. We worked around the clock. There were times when we were doing proving flights for the people that we were hiring overseas, and that we were flying and working, 24, 36 hours at a time. But somehow you just did it. And of course, we were a lot younger then. And you came back at the end of a very long day and a half, and you just loved what you were doing. And I think there was something about the camaraderie and the people that just made it so very special. We had 1988 was a pivotal year for many reasons. It was the best of times and it was the worst of times. We had a great year. We were recruiting. Actually, I was on the road a lot doing flight attendant recruiting. The airline was rebounding fiscally, financially. It looked like the new chairman, gentleman by the name of Thomas Plaskett, was righting the ship, as I kind of like to say. And we were kind of riding this high wave, and things were looking like they were going to improve and get better. So that's probably one of my last really happy moments with Pan Am, in that there was this spirit of hope and elation that things were on an upward swing.
And that was 1988.
That was 1988. We had, and I'll never forget this, we had a very big Christmas party that year. And actually, it was at my home. And we had the whole flight service office team and many of the special assignment flight attendants. And we were celebrating. We had a wonderful event, remembering that we were working hard and we were accomplishing things. We were getting it done. And that was positive. And it was a very happy time.
And then a little bit after that, Flight 103.
It was that next week, actually. It was the week after the party, that it just all came crashing out from underneath us when Pan Am 103 was blown up, by terrorists. And that kind of was the loss of hope. That event kind of was the death knell in some ways, I guess. Many of us looked at it that way, of the airline that we loved. And what was so difficult was that we worked so hard to turn it around. And now it seemed like the forces were just aligning against us. And no matter what we did, no matter how hard we worked, and when we knew that people were deliberately and intentionally, because they were scared, not booking Pan Am, not booking to fly Pan Am.
Because it was a terrorist target.
Because it was a terrorist target. To see the airplanes go out empty and the crews come back, there was a sense of you could see there people were demoralized, because we had worked so hard and we'd gone through so much, and we thought we were on the right path, and then it was all taken away from us in this horrible, horrible terrorist attack.
Speaking of Lockerbie, you have a personal connection to it. You were there after the
Yes.
crash. Can you share some of your stories in regards to that tragedy?
Yes. And, it's still difficult all these years later to remember the emotions and the the grief, the overwhelming grief that everybody felt, but none more so than the people in London. I was asked to go over again on special assignment, and I was assigned to assist in the London flight service office because the London base was a small base, and we talk about family, the whole company is a family, but they were just so tight. They were a very close knit group. And this was a London based crew that was operating Flight 103. So it was all the crew from that base. They were devastated. It was almost impossible not to feel their pain. You felt it the minute. I remember touching base and going into the office there, and it was impossible. They couldn't get through the day without this overwhelming sense of grief and utter despair. So I was working there for a while. I did have to go to Lockerbie a couple of times because I was assigned to be a communication link between Pan Am and the families of the two French-speaking flight attendants who were on board the aircraft. And there were nights when I would be on the phone with them and just let them talk for hours. We'd talk to 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, just listening, to their grief or to their stories about their loved one and their child. And it was painful. It was heart-wrenching because you knew there was nothing you could do but listen. But Pan Am was so good with attending to the needs, anything. We had carte blanche. And there were many of people like myself who were attached to the families, not only the flight attendant families, but the passenger families. Each person was assigned a Pan Am supervisor escort that handled every detail that they needed handling. If they needed to come over, if they wanted to be there, then we arranged all the travel. We took care of everything for them. And I'm proud of that association. I'm proud that we were able to do that. But there was a knife in our hearts, and it was difficult. There's no getting around that. It still hurts. That whenever there's an anniversary of Lockerbie, and it is common that you see the cockpit that was broken and that was exploded and found on the ground in Lockerbie, splashed across a newspaper or a media report, that your heart doesn't skip a beat and that you don't wish it weren't so.
Thank you for sharing that story. So getting back to the museum, anything you want to tell the listening audience?
Come visit us. Come support us. Come visit our website. We're on social media. We're on Facebook and we're on Instagram. And you can become a Panamaniac, as we sometimes refer to ourselves, and get to know more about this airline that truly did change the world.
Thank you very much for your time, Linda. I'm sure you will be back on the program.
I hope so. Looking forward to it. Thank you.
Pan Am was a pioneer in air travel and still stands as one of the most iconic and innovative airlines in aviation history. That legacy lives on at the Pan Am Museum in Garden City, New York, where you can explore the rich history of the aircrafts and individuals at the heart of the company known as the world's most experienced airline. For more information about the Pan Am Museum, check out our website at www.thepanammuseum.org. You can also find us on Facebook and Instagram. Please consider becoming a member of the museum or making a donation. As was once a tagline in one of our commercials, we would greatly appreciate your support to help the Pan Am Museum continue making the going great. We want to hear from you. If you have a question for us or want to share your story, our email address is podcast@thepanammuseum.org. And with that, we're going to close out this episode with a Pan Am song called You Call It the World, We Call It Home. As flight crews once said to passengers departing for their destinations around the world, thank you for flying, Pan Am.
There is a place where the sun comes up, bright with the promise of day. Coming on high, making love with the sky. It's only